The Taliban has declared it wants peaceful relations with other countries in its first news conference since taking control in Afghanistan. The group has been keen to show a new face to the world, pledging inclusion and education for women and religious tolerance. The group insists it will offer amnesty to anyone who worked with the government or foreign forces. But reports of Taliban rule in cities captured during the group's advance have raised fears about these promises.
We have pardoned anyone, all those who had fought against us. We don't want a repeat of war. We want to do away with the factors of conflict. So the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan does not have any conflict with anybody. We want the fighting to end. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan is committed to the rights of women within the framework of Sharia. Our women have the same rights. They can work in different sectors on the basis of our rules and regulations, in education and health and other areas. They are going to be working shoulder to shoulder with us. We want to assure the international community there will be no discrimination against women, but of course within our religious framework.
Well, let's go live now to Kabul, where we can speak with our correspondent Rob McBride. Rob, you were watching that news conference start to finish. How would you summarise it?
I think it was as we expected. You know, we've seen it's not quite a charm offensive, but, you know, after all of the military offensive of the recent weeks, it is certainly the Taliban trying to reassure the international community and also Afghans themselves that this is going to be a different type of regime, a different type of government, a softer side, if you like, more respectful and inclusive. All of these key words we've tended to hear in the last week or two. And now we hear it in this first official news conference. It is very important. This is almost like the keynote address, I guess, for this new government. It's been long anticipated. It was meant to take place. We heard talk that it could have taken place yesterday, Monday. It got delayed, and now we have it. So this is important. Interestingly, right at the end there, we have heard that this will become, it seems, a regular feature. There will be news conferences on a regular basis moving forward, rather like the kind of international community, the Western liberal sort of countries that it seems this news conference was aimed at. You did get the sense that although we were addressing issues that are very important here in Afghanistan, and to all the Afghan journalists who were there in this news conference, it was very mindful of what the world watching would think about this new government. And the Taliban comes into power here really with something of a hill to climb. You have a very skeptical international audience looking at this organization, given all of the history that we know about going back 20 years. It has unexpectedly, in many respects, suddenly found itself inheriting this country. And there is an extreme skepticism from the international community about the way the Taliban conducted itself, for example, during these negotiations, that as part of the agreement, as part of the process, it was meant to enter into negotiations with the what is now the defunct government that has just collapsed, but it was meant to negotiate with that government, and there is skepticism that it was playing for time, that it was acting in bad faith. All of those things, obviously, which the Taliban denies, and it blames the other side. It blames the outgoing government for acting in bad faith and for bringing about the crisis that resulted in its downcoming. So all of this did seem to be aimed at trying to convince the overseas audience, and you got a lot of that. It did address some of those issues, particularly that the international community is concerned about. One thing we didn't mention earlier was that the fact that never again would allow Afghanistan land or soil to be used for the training of groups of fighters who would threaten those countries overseas. That was one of the big concerns that obviously led to the intervention of 20 years ago. So there was that guarantee. Then specifically, there was the guarantee in answer to one of the questions to the people who are just a kilometre or two away from here, clamouring to get into the international airport. And as we were listening to the news conference, we hear occasionally gunshots ring out, sometimes the odd single shot, sometimes automatic gunfire as Taliban guards and fighters who have a cordon around the terminal try to keep people back. It is a reminder of, it gives you the context of what's happening here. But there was the assurance for all of those people that there is no need to run, that there is a guarantee that there will not be reprisals or grudges or a knock on the door or interrogations, as they put it. That people who are there can go home. There will not be any recriminations. It remains to be seen whether the people who are in fear this Tuesday evening that they are going to be targeted, whether they will believe that or not. But certainly that was the message that the Taliban wanted to get across with this news conference.
OK, Rob McBride there reporting live for us from Kabul. Rob, thank you. The head of the Taliban's political office in Qatar's capital, Doha, is heading back to Afghanistan. Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar led the group's negotiations in peace talks with the US and Afghan governments. He departed after meeting Qatar's foreign minister earlier today. Talks between the Taliban and former Afghan officials will now be held domestically instead of in Doha. Let's bring in Haroon Rahimi. He's an assistant professor of law at the American University of Afghanistan and joins us by Skype from Istanbul. It's good to have you with us again. It's quite significant, is it not, that Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar is heading back to Afghanistan. Does this give any indication, do you think, of who's going to be making up the government, what kind of government we're going to see, especially now that the top people are basing themselves in the capital of the country they have just seized?
So let's just be clear that he's not the top person in the Taliban movement, Mullah Baradar. He's been the head of their political office in Doha, but they have a system of leadership where the leadership council is at the head. And Mullah Baradar has generally been acting as the face, the political office. You can compare him to kind of a Ministry of Foreign Affairs in a sense. But the head of the military committee and the head of the leadership committee are two different people. In terms of what kind of government we can expect now, given the developments we've observed so far, I had hoped, and the hope had been, that there will be an interim government that is neutral. That hope was lost when Ghani escaped Kabul and Taliban said that they had to step in to fill the vacuum. They could not just wait until an interim government, and they could not wait for an interim government to take over from Ghani, and then a new government will be formed under the supervision of an interim government. That is not the case. Now Taliban are, for all intents and purposes, in charge, and they will be controlling the process through which a new government will be formed. This means that we will be having a Taliban-controlled process through which an inclusive government will be formed. Taliban are pretty much holding all cards. There are two considerations that may kind of point towards a more inclusive system. One is international legitimacy. It is something that is important to the Taliban. It is one of the things they care about. They care about many things that some often may come in tension with their desire to have international legitimacy. We'll have to see how trade-offs will work out. The second issue, the consideration that may point towards possible more inclusive government, even despite the fact that Taliban will control the process of creating the government, is their desire to have domestic legitimacy. You have to realize that the Taliban are not a popular movement. They are becoming more popular. I believe they are, given that they are maintaining law and order and they are saying some of the right things. But it's still a large part of the population is incredibly skeptical of them, distrusting, fears reprisal, and remembers the context through which they conducted a brutal war, killed civilians, and conducted many sort of crimes and against the population. So you have a very unconvinced population, and they will, if they have foresight, they will care to have the different constituencies of Afghanistan represented in the government to gain domestic legitimacy. If they fail to do that, form an inclusive government that would ensure international domestic legitimacy, then I'm afraid that we will have a resistance forming against them. The same way when in Born 1, Taliban were executed when the 2001, the new system was formed after the Taliban were toppled, we saw the Taliban insurgency kind of re-emerging, Taliban emerging as an insurgency. Now, there are hints that there will be an insurgency formed. I mean, the former VP claimed that he's the head of, still the caretaker of the government. There are hints. I mean, Panjshir still has not surrendered to the Taliban, and some military there are rumors that some military assets were moved there. So, I mean, and those are still on hold, and it's going to depend on whether the Taliban will be able to bring in their oppositions into the government to neutralize any, preempt any possibility of resistance becoming popular. Even, some people may still call it resistance, but how inclusive their government will be is going to determine how popular the resistance will be. And international diplomacy is also important because it's going to determine who's willing to possibly help resistance or not.
OK, very notable there. Lots of focus in that presser on trying to get people to stay in the country, to prevent a brain drain, to rebuild the nation. We'll just have to wait and see if the people of Afghanistan will heed that call. For now, Haroon Rahimi, great to get your analysis and your thoughts. Thank you very much. Indeed. Now, the NATO Secretary-General has called on the Taliban to facilitate the departure of all those who want to leave the country. Jens Stoltenberg also blamed the Afghan forces for what's happening in Kabul right now.
The Afghan political leadership failed to stand up to the Taliban and to achieve the peaceful solution that Afghans desperately wanted. This failure of Afghan leadership led to the tragedy we are witnessing today.
Turkey and Greece fear being at the forefront of another refugee crisis as thousands of Afghans look to flee Taliban rule. Turkey's already building a wall along its border with Iran to stop people crossing illegally, while Greece has said it cannot become a gateway into the EU for Afghans. Greece was on the front line of Europe's migration crisis in 2015, where nearly 1 million people fleeing conflict in Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan landed on its islands. The EU is calling for Europe to create humanitarian corridors for Afghan refugees. Jonah Hull reports from London.
For the moment, of course, the focus is on getting foreign nationals out of Afghanistan along with Afghan support staff. Some countries in Europe are going further. The Germans are adding human rights activists, lawyers, other people deemed to be at risk from the Taliban to their list of evacuees. The British government is later due to announce details of an emergency resettlement scheme for those most in need, focused its thought on women and girls in Afghanistan. But not all countries are going to be quite so willing and eager to help. The Greeks have already said this morning they are not willing, again, to be a gateway country for refugees making their way from Turkey across the water and into Europe. Austria, for instance, as we speak, is still continuing with deportation plans for failed Afghan asylum seekers back to Afghanistan as a means of deterrence for new arrivals, and doing so with the support of 90% of the Austrian public. So it's all very well for people like the French President Emmanuel Macron to stand up as he did on Monday and call for a joined-up European approach to ensure the safe passage of people coming if they want to come. But this is an incredibly thorny issue in Europe. It's led to the downfall of governments in recent years. It's spawned right-wing movements in almost every country. Governments, I think, will certainly be on their guard, if not all of them actively preparing to accommodate what may soon be coming their way.
There are huge parts of Afghanistan where the Taliban enjoy support from certain ethnic groups. The Torkham border crossing with Pakistan is one such place. It has now reopened, and there's no rush of people trying to flee, as Kamal Haider explains.
The main border crossing between Afghanistan and Pakistan at Torkham is now open for business. Trucks have been traveling in both directions. There were apprehensions that as the Taliban advance across the country, tens of thousands of refugees will pour across this border into Pakistan. But the ground reality is very different. People living close to the Pakistani border, all the way from Helmand province to Nuristan up in the north, are mostly Pushtun tribes. They, of course, welcome the Taliban. They have seen the Taliban rule in the past. And what we saw at this border crossing, that instead of tens of thousands of Afghans coming across the border, we saw hundreds of Afghans eager to cross that border and go back to their country. Most of the people that we spoke to over here are elated and jubilant with the fact that the Taliban are back in power. They, on the other hand, do not agree with the international community, and they see a ray of hope for a lasting Afghan settlement.
We welcome the Taliban back in Afghanistan as they are the true heroes of the country, and none other than them can bring a lasting peace to this war-torn country destroyed by many.
Afghanistan is in ruins from the last 40 years. Firstly, we were made homeless by Russians and then the Americans, but thank God, finally we've got freedom from their invasions. We trust the Taliban and hope they will bring peace, stability and progress to this country.
But while the situation on the borders was now returning back to normal, there were frantic diplomatic efforts to try to put the Afghan leaders on the same table with the Taliban. The former Foreign Minister of Afghanistan, Salahuddin Rabbani, is in Pakistan, along with Yunus Qanuni, the head of the Afghan parliament, and also Ustad Mohaqiq is amongst that group. He represents the minority Hazara community. What Pakistan has been telling the Afghan Taliban is that there should be an inclusive government which should include all the ethnic groups of Afghanistan. Therefore, it offers a ray of hope for the first time in 2 decades for a lasting peaceful settlement to the Afghan conflict. What the Pakistanis have been saying to the Taliban is that it has to be an inclusive government. The Taliban have also announced an amnesty and said that there will be no retribution even for those people who've been working with the Americans.
Well, girls in the western Afghan city of Herat have attended school just days after the Taliban takeover. The armed group says it will ensure inclusiveness for women despite its strict guidelines on how they should dress. The United Nations is urging the Taliban to keep its promises.